Hello everyone and welcome back to the good stuff. We are continuing our match between Paul Charles Morphy and Johann Jakob Löwenthal from the 1858. Currently the score is 8-3 in Morphy's favor. 11 games have been played, and if you're only joining in now, do check out some of the links in the description below. You can either watch the entire Paul Morphy saga from the beginning, so you know everything that's happened so far, or at least if you don't have the time, check out the previous video in the saga, which is the previous game 11 of the match, which we called Löwenthal's Immortal, as it is quite the game and a very significant game in the match. So that being said, let's check out what happens here and how Morphy deals with just losing a game, and not just any game. As we said, it was Löwenthal's Immortal. So Morphy with the white pieces opens with e4. We have e6, we have the French defense by Löwenthal, d4 and d5. And Morphy does something you should never do. He plays the exchange French. E captures on d5, we have captures and bishop to d3. Not right away, of course, but first knight to f3, we have knight to f6, and only then bishop to d3. And now bishop to d6 nowadays is an automatic. You want to castle as soon as possible. But here we have the older continuation, bishop to e6. Kind of saying I'm not going to allow you to play c4, because then I'm just gonna capture it. Here we have castles by Morphy and bishop to d6 only now. We have knight to c3. Morphy continues development, and c6 now strengthening the center, and that d5 pawn. We have knight to e5, immediately grabbing more space in the center, and now queen to b6. And it is as of move 8 that this position has never been reached again. So the d4 pawn is under attack, and Morphy defends it with bishop to e3. And while doing so, invites black to capture on b2. Is it possible to capture on b2? Well, it is. Are there better moves? Of course there are. Your king is still in the center of the board. You might want to castle first. So here first knight b to d7. Continuing development and saying to Morphy, I might castle kingside, but I might also castle queenside. Depends on what you do. So here Morphy just strengthens his grip in the center. He plays f4, and now bishop captures on e5. We have f captures and knight to g4. Puts pressure on Morphy's bishop on e3 and the queen to d2. Just continuing development while defending the bishop here. And here we have knight captures on e3 by Löwenthal. Queen captures, and now he feels very comfortable about grabbing this pawn. So queen captures on b2. Now putting pressure on the knight here, and knight to e2. So it seems that Löwenthal grabbed the pawn successfully and will not be paying any sort of a price for it. So queen to a3, you of course are expecting a rook on b1. So queen to a3, you want to be able to bring your queen back, and knight to f4 now. So maybe this little pawn grab is just enough. Maybe this is just what Morphy needs to start some sort of an attack here. And here, indeed, if you go for something like castles, you run into some very nasty stuff, like bishop captures on h7 check, picking up the queen. So you can't really just castle. Okay, it's not that simple. So first queen back to e7. Now you are ready to castle, and now rook 8 to b1, saying, okay, you're free to castle, but you have to give back the pawn. So indeed, if you castle, you can just give back the pawn, and it's it's questionable how good this will be for you, because you still have a backwards pawn here. Your knight is now pinned. You have a problem with the rook on b7. The other rook can come to b1. Could be problematic. Another thing you could do is you could try to play b6, defend the pawn, and say, okay, I'm just going to castle on the next move. But it's also not that simple, because of knight captures. And now if f captures, you will not be castling kingside. So queen captures, and now bishop to f5. Again, poses some problems for black. For example, queen e7, and now queen to c3. Again, goes after the pawn. And it's incredibly easy for black to make a mistake here. Would black find a move like knight to b8 here, which really hinders development, or would he go for something like rook to c8, which is completely losing? It's hard to say. For example, rook b to e1, and now you say, okay, what do you do now? Black castles, and now queen to h3 with a double attack, threatening to pick up the knight while also delivering checkmate. So it's a very difficult position to play. So after this rook a to b1, Löwenthal says, okay, I grabbed the pawn, I'm just going to castle queenside, and everything is perfectly fine. But Morphy says, nope, not so easy. And he starts remaneuvering. Bishop to e2. So what's happening here? Well, knight to b6. The knight can now come to c4, which is a very important square, and now the bishop moved, so the queen can come into the game. Queen to b3. Now, for example, if the knight moves, you can just deliver checkmate. It's a very nice setup here. Queen on b3 and the rook on b1. So rook to d7, black says, okay, I'm not having that. The knight will be able to move, and the rook and queen will be guarding the b7 square. So knight back to d3. Morphy says, all right, I'm going to claim the c5 square for my knight, and knight to c4. And this is where the fun really happens, because now Morphy does go knight to c5, and now there's a question. Is knight to d2 any good? I mean, there's a beautiful fork here, 2 rooks and the queen. In fact, it is. It is the best black has. For example, knight to d2, but it's not that simple. Queen to g3, now offering one of the rooks. For example, knight captures on f1, bishop captures, and now black has a problem because this is hanging and this is hanging, and you really have to figure out how to go about this. Now, would black be able to find b6 here? Allow the capture of this rook? It's hard to say. Or rather, would he try and save the rook, and then you just run into, well, knight captures on b7. It's just a very ugly move to face, because after rook captures bishop a6, black just completely falls apart. So it is a very interesting position. However, after this knight to c5 move, Löwenthal played rook to c7 first. He said, okay, I'm just going to move the rook, and the knight to d2 is my next move. I mean, it's definitely happening. However, Morphy plays queen to a4. Now, knight to d2 does not come with an attack on the queen, and you will just have to face queen captures on a7, followed by queen to a8. So here, king to b8, not really the greatest because of this check. The king and rook are in, being forked here, you cannot capture, and after the king moves, you will first capture on c4 to prevent any future forks, then you might capture on c7, or depending on what white plays, it's just going to be a very messy position, much favorable for white. So instead of moving the king, we have b6, now attacking the knight, and here well, here Morphy goes for bishop captures on c4. And recapturing the bishop doesn't really work, because here you have rook captures on b6, and black completely falls apart. You have queen a6 check, followed by rook to b8. Or if you capture the rook, it's not much better. Queen to a8 is checkmate, because the knight covers the b7 and the d7 squares. So after this bishop captures on c4, we have, well, this doesn't work, so we might as well capture the knight. We have b captures on c5. And now bishop to a6 with check. We have king to d7, and now we reach a beautiful position, a true Morphy-esque position, because, you know, everyone can attack where it's easy to attack, where there are some attacking moves. But how do you attack where it doesn't seem all that clear that you should be attacking, or if there are any attacking moves? Well, this is where Morphy really thrived, and where he found beautiful attacking moves. So feel free to pause the video here and try to find the only move that wins here for white while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations, as it's really not an easy move to find. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it's bishop to b7. And now it seems like, well, yes, okay, it's a fine move, but what does it do really? Well, it does a lot, actually. For one, it prevents the rook from entering the game. For example, any rook to b8 action can just be met with bishop captures check. You pick up the rook. It's that part's simple. And well, the only problem in the continuation of the game is that Löwenthal made it too easy for Morphy. He played rook to d8. But let's just check what happens if you play with the most proper defense, which is queen to h4. You have to give the king one extra square to, you know, be able to move, and also you don't allow any captures here because the queen would hang on a4. So it's a very good square for the queen. You're also threatening to pick up this d4 pawn with check and trade queens. However, c3 defends the pawn. For example, rook to d8. Now you bring the rook into the game, and now queen to a5. threatening queen to c5 while also going for that d6 square. And now after black plays c captures on d4, doesn't really matter. Queen c5 and queen back to e7, trying to trade queens as you've just grabbed more material. Now comes the intended move, which comes from the bishop to b7 idea. Bishop captures on c6, and here black just falls apart. The king has nowhere to go. If you move the king, you lose the queen, and of course if you capture the bishop, then just rook b7 check, and that's it. Rook has to block. Rook captures on c7 check, doesn't really matter. King e8 and queen captures on e7. So this is what happens with best possible defense after bishop to b7. That's why bishop to b7 is the only winning move here. However, Löwenthal made it a bit too easy for Morphy. He played rook to d8 right away, depriving his king of one very important square. And here Morphy just played bishop captures on c6, and it was in this position that Johann Jakob Löwenthal resigned the game, and it's on move 25, so quite a miniature for Paul Morphy. And it's a shame for Löwenthal. He just played his immortal game on the previous game. Now after game 12 has been played, it's gonna be incredibly difficult for him to come back in the match, but we'll see what happens. The match is still young. So here you resign because after captures the rook is pinned, and then rook to b7 is deadly. There's nothing for you to do. You cannot block, you cannot move the king because you lose the queen. So you might as well defend with this king to e8 move, but it's still with check, captures, and now the rook falls as well. It's not really something you want to, even try playing. And another thing after bishop captures is you can go king to c8, that's true, but now comes queen to a6 check, and the king has nowhere to go. You have to start blocking rook b7, but then just rook captures on b7, attacks the queen, threatens a lot of nasty discoveries, and there's nothing for you to do here. Like you could block, you could move the queen. It's silly to even suggest a move here, because whatever you do, it's made into, let's say, rook d7. You're gonna get rook captures on d7 check. The king has nowhere to go. Only move king to b8, and now of course rook to b1 or queen to b7. Everything is checkmate. Doesn't really matter. So yeah. Wonderful game by Paul Morphy, wonderful attacking game. There were some chances for Löwenthal if he played that knight to d2 move right away instead of waiting for Morphy to really get his attack going. But after that, Morphy found bishop to b7, it was just all over. And what a nice bounce back in the match. Not really a bounce back score-wise, but as Löwenthal really played a spectacular game in the previous game, it's definitely a nice game for Morphy to bounce back with. And like I said, if you haven't seen it, do check it out. It will be the first link you see in the description below. So yeah, that's the game, another game in the Paul Morphy saga. I do hope you guys enjoyed it. I would like to thank Polak Shlomo, Juan Vicente Alvarez, Eddie Latzel, Mr. Spacebar there, Pablo Mohan, and Rampage Incorporated for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot, I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check two of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage of the Paul Morphy saga, checking up on your wonderful suggestions and whatever else happens in the chess world. So thank you all, I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.